Hi, I'm Michaela.
And I'm Hannah, and today we will be walking you through the anatomy and physiology of swallowing. Swallowing consists of four main stages: the oral preparatory stage, the oral transport stage, the pharyngeal stage, and finally the esophageal stage. Understanding them in this order helps us recognize how the nervous system and the muscles work together to carry out the swallowing process.
Deglutition is highly coordinated and consists of multiple events firing together perfectly. There are two non-negotiable goals. First, get the food or liquid down into the esophagus and stomach. Secondly, protect the airway.
During the oral preparatory stage, actions here are volitional, meaning they are under conscious control. This is the stage where mastication occurs, chewing the bolus to prepare it for swallowing. The bolus is manipulated and broken down with the help of oral mucosa, which lines the inside of our mouth and provides lubrication, along with the saliva from the salivary glands. The parotid gland, innervated by cranial nerve 9, glossopharyngeal, and the submandibular gland, innervated by cranial nerve 7, facial, both produce mixed saliva that helps with bolus cohesion, making it smoother and easier to swallow. To form the bolus into a more manageable mass, several muscles of mastication are used. For jaw closure, the masseter, temporalis, and medial pterygoid muscles are involved. For jaw opening, the lateral pterygoid, digastric, and myohyoid muscles are used. Rotary grinding motions of the jaw also assist in breaking down that food. The tongue plays a major role during this stage. It contains intrinsic muscles controlled by cranial nerve 12, hypoglossal, that help shape the bolus by flattening it against the palate. These muscles include the longitudinal, vertical, and transverse muscles. The tongue also has extrinsic muscles which help position the bolus. So these include the genioglossus, which retracts the tongue, the hypoglossus, which depresses it, and the palatoglossus, which elevates the back of the tongue. These extrinsic muscles are innervated by cranial nerve 10 primarily, the vagus nerve.
Next, stage 2 of the swallow, the oral transport stage. The main goal here is to move the bolus anteriorly to posteriorly, in other words, to the back towards the pharynx. This is done by elevating the tongue tip up and pushing the bolus up towards the hard palate and back into the pharynx, creating a pressure wave. In addition to the tongue muscles, there are also some facial muscles involved in the bolus transit. That includes the buccinator, which helps keep tension in your cheek so there's no pocketing in the sulci. The buccinator is innervated by cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve. Another muscle is the orbicularis oris, which acts as a lip seal, preventing anterior spillage. Another major structure we'll touch on are the fascial arches. There are two. The first, the anterior, the palatoglossus muscle, and the posterior palatopharyngeal muscle. These contain sensory receptors, and when bolus moves posteriorly and meets contact with these arches, sensory signals are then sent up via the glossopharyngeal nerve and the vagus nerve to essentially initiate the trigger.
This moves us to the pharyngeal stage, which is reflexive and begins with sensory input from the pharynx, cranial nerves 5, 7, 9, and 10, activating the central pattern generator, or CPG, in the brainstem. The nucleus tractus solitarius receives sensory information, and the nucleus ambiguus sends coordinated motor commands out, which is essentially the brainstem's swallow command center. First, velopharyngeal closure prevents nasal regurgitation via the levator veli palatini and tensor veli palatini. Simultaneously, hyolaryngeal elevation and anterior excursion occur, driven by the myohyaloid, geniohyaloid, and anterior digastric, pulling the hyoid and larynx up and forward. This motion opens up the UES and helps tilt the epiglottis passively. Airway protection continues with closure from the true vocal folds, thyroarytenoid, false vocal folds, and aryepiglottic folds. Meanwhile, the pharyngeal constrictors, superior, medial, and inferior, which is cranial nerve 10, create a stripping wave, propelling that bolus downward. The stylopharyngeus, palatopharyngeus, and the saplingopharyngeus help lift and shorten the pharynx, increasing the pressure. The bolus passes through the valleculae and piriform sinuses, reaching the esophageal phase.
The last stage of the swallow is the esophageal phase. In this stage, everything is involuntary and lasts approximately 8 to 20 seconds. Here is where peristalsis occurs when there's wave-like contractions when the bolus moves down the length of the esophagus. This is mainly done by the autonomic nervous system, especially with the help of cranial nerve 10 vagus. The gateway from the pharynx to the esophagus is the upper esophageal sphincter, also known as UES. The UES is composed of the cricopharyngeal muscle, and here it is relaxed because the hyoid bone is lifted and from the bolus pressure itself. As the bolus travels down the length in those wave-like contractions, it then reaches the lower esophageal sphincter. Here, the lower esophageal sphincter is just relaxed long enough to let the bolus pass into the stomach. After the bolus passes into the stomach, the swallow is over. The first stage of swallowing is called the oral preparatory stage. This is when we get our food ready to swallow. Here is where we break down the food, and at the same time, our saliva, which is made by glands in our mouth, mixes with the food. Saliva is super important here because it softens the food, makes it stick together, and makes it easier to swallow. Chewing may seem simple, but it takes a teamwork of different muscles working together. There are muscles in our jaw that help us close our mouth. These would include the masseter, temporalis, and the pterygoids. Those muscles help us close our jaw, where others like the lateral pterygoid, digastric, and mylohyoid helps to keep it open. The tongue also plays a big role here. The tongue is one big muscle, but it actually has several muscles inside it that work together. The intrinsic muscles of the tongue help shape the food into soft and round balls of bolus, which is food, while the extrinsic muscles help move the tongue around the mouth, helping to push the food into place. These muscles allow the tongue to stick out, pull back, lift up, or lower as needed.
The next part of swallowing is called the oral transport stage, and just like the first stage, it's something you can control. This is when your tongue moves the food from the front of your mouth to the middle and then to the back, getting ready to go down your throat. Your tongue does most of the work here. It makes a gentle wave-like motion, starting with the tip of the tongue, pushing the food against the roof of your mouth, and then pushing it backwards towards your throat. Other muscles help out too. One keeps your cheeks tight so food doesn't get stuck on the sides. This is mostly done by a muscle called the masseter, which also helps us with chewing too. Another important muscle is called the orbicularis oris, which keeps your lips closed so food or liquid doesn't spill out of your mouth. As the food gets to the back of your mouth, it touches special areas in your throat that send messages to your brain. The messages tell your body, get ready, it's time to swallow. That's when the automatic part of swallowing kicks in and the food is moved safely down your throat.
Now let's talk about the pharyngeal stage of swallowing. This is when the food or liquid leaves your mouth and enters into your throat. At this point, this is an automatic action, so you're no longer in control of the movements. It's reflexive. This stage happens super quick, usually in about 1 second, and during this time, your body works really hard to make sure the food or liquid goes into the right pipe, into the esophagus and not your airway. This is automatic, and it's started by special sensors in the back of your throat. So when food or bolus and liquid touch those sensors, there are messages that are sent to your brain, and this acts as a swallowing command center. So it makes sure everything happens in just the right time and just the right order. So first, a structure called the hard palate, which is up on the roof of your mouth, the soft part, that closes so food or liquid doesn't get up into your nose, which would be very uncomfortable. Next, while at the same time, a small bone in your neck is called the hyoid bone. That actually moves up and forward, and this movement actually pulls your voice box upward and behind it, helping to close off the airway. And a flap of cartilage, also called the epiglottis, flaps down and flips down over your airway, like acting like a lid, making sure nothing goes down the wrong pipe. In addition, other small structures in your throat tightly seal off your airway, protecting it from top to bottom. So, while all this is happening to protect your lungs from food or liquid entering into it, the muscles of the back of your throat contract in a wave-like motion, squeezing from top to bottom. This is super important, and it helps the food or drink to go down the esophagus, and also the back of your tongue pushes backward to help move everything down smoothly and with enough pressure. And once the food or drink is safely passed through your throat, it enters into the esophagus, and then we move on to our final stage of swallowing.
Now we're at the final stage of swallowing, the esophageal stage. Like the last stage, this part is completely out of your control. It happens automatically and usually takes about 8 to 20 seconds for the food or liquid to reach your stomach. Once the food enters your esophagus, which is the tube that connects your throat to your stomach, a wave-like movement of the muscles begins. These waves help push the food or drink downward through the esophagus and into the stomach. This movement is called peristalsis, and it's part of how your body takes care of important processes without your body having to think about it. At the top of the esophagus is a muscle gate. It's called the upper esophageal sphincter. This muscle acts like a door between your throat and your esophagus. It opens during the swallow so that the food can pass through, and then it closes again to protect the airway. This door opens because of two things: the upward movement of the small bone in your neck, called the hyoid bone, like we mentioned earlier, and the pressure of the food or drink itself pushing downward. As the food travels down, it reaches another gate near the stomach. This one is called the lower esophageal sphincter, and it stays closed most all of the time to prevent food or acid from coming back up, but it opens briefly to let the food into the stomach. Once the food reaches the stomach, the swallow is complete. After that, your airway opens back up so you can breathe again, your voice box lowers back to its normal position, the soft palate relaxes, and all the swallowing muscles return to rest, ready for your next bite or sip.